Meyer. Since several years I have received the press releases from Stan Meyer of the Water Fuel Cell Corporation. When I was asked to invite some US participants to this conference, Stan Meyer came to my mind immediately. So I wrote him a personal letter, and I'm very, very happy that he came over. He has about 40 patents related to energy. He is one of the most brilliant inventors. And I want to make this introduction very short to give him more time to present his water fuel cell. Stan Meyer, please.
Thank you. Oh, I got a button here, right?
You got a button? No, this is a microphone first.
Yes.
And there's a button.
How do you turn it on?
Kann jemand den Slide-Projektor anschalten, bitte?
2, 3, 4. Can you hear me? Before I begin, I would like to make a few little announcements. Number one, in 30 minutes, there's no way you can present the entire technology of the water fuel cell because it covers 40 major patents and some revolutionary new technology. If those are interested, we do release a publication on this. Please contact Ike, and he will give you the address of our laboratories in water fuel cell. It's basically an overall view of our technology. It does not get into the full technical aspect of the technology. We have, over the years since 1975, have periodically released some of the information on news releases. And again, if you will contact Ike and give him your name and address, we'd be more than happy to send you this information. Also in the works, we are setting up a World International Energy Symposium in Sweden, by which we will invite more than 140 nations of the world to come to see the demonstrations of the water fuel cell technology and its ramification and how this type of technology can be utilized in the world energy market. Bear with me, I got to learn how to use the slide projector. When you go home, I want you, if you will, look in the Bible on Job 38, verse 22 and 23. Back in 1975, I was very actively engaged in the retailing of truck parts, making over $1 million a year profit. But when the U.S. experienced the Arab oil embargo, lower, too loud, slower. Uh-oh, I got a problem. 30 minutes. 45. Okay, 45. Praise the Lord. Okay, back in 1975, I was very actively engaged in the retailing of truck parts, making well over $1 million a year profit. I'll try to go slower now. And when the Arabs threw the embargo on the United States, it alarmed me that a little country over in the Mideast could actually cripple the United States. Right now, based on the oil pressures in the existing fields of the world, whereby which the United States dropped in oil pressure from 1965 to 75, and where we're now dependent on 60% of foreign oil to maintain the industrial base of the United States. The same thing that had occurred in the United States is also now occurring in the Arab fields, whereby which their oil pressure is dropping 3 times faster than it occurred in the United States. Go a little bit more slower, right? Okay. The same thing that has been occurring in the Arab oil fields and that had occurred in the United States oil fields have also been occurring in the North Sea oil fields. And so therefore, back in 1975, it was imperative that we must come up with some form of alternate energy source if the economic base of the country is to survive. And you have been hearing many, many new principles of technology in the Energy Symposium. And now let's take some of the knowledge that has been presented to you and see if we can't come up with an apparatus capable of using water as a new fuel source, both for its application and utilization of gas energy as well as electrical energy. And I put the logo on there because the Lord had talked, or when he was talking to Job, asked him that if he had known anything about the characteristic and knowledge of water. So the Lord really specified that the knowledge of water would come out at a time of great trouble. In the development of the water fuel cell technology, the main thrust was, number one, legalize its technology. Do not blow your ego, because it was imperative that this technology would be protected for the world economic market. In order to bring in a new energy system into the country, it could not take one major or master patent to solve the energy problem. It had to take a myriad of many inventions integrated together to come up with a universal power system that could literally be utilized anywhere in the economy. In other words, what good would it be to develop a system that would provide home heating if, in fact, we could not get the cars and the trucks on the road moving with a new fuel source? Or what good would it be if we would put the energy into industry, yet farmers would not have energy to process or to plow their lands and harvest their crops? And if we had no way, for an example, to apply an energy system to the military integrity base of the United States and other countries of the world, then we would have a tremendous problem. So the main thrust in development of water fuel cell technology was to hit every area of the economy and move in a bilateral movement in case and when the oil shortages start to hit. We live in a very unsecured times. Very shortly you will see tremendous vexation of lack of energy and the lack of energy supplies. In my files back home in my laboratories, I have the most scientific compilation study on hydrogen that has ever come out of the scientific world through NASA, where the United States government spent more than $10 million to tell me that hydrogen was the most advanced, best or ideal fuel source that could be used and brought into the economy very quickly. But in the report specified that there was three major areas that had to be addressed. Number one, be able to produce the hydrogen gas economically, control the rate of its production, adjust the burn rate of hydrogen gas to co-equal that of the fossil fuels, and I added a fourth one, the ability to transport the hydrogen gas without spark ignition. And of course I own all the patent rights both nationally and internationally on this technology. Not only have I been filing the patents on its base technology, but I've also been filing patents on the related technology, give me a technological buffer zone to bring the technology into the world market area. Some of the major arguments that I had used in the United States in releasing this technology was, gentlemen, number one, what happens if a foreign power can come in your land and use your own existing laws to block this technology from coming in existence? And of course, presidential executive action came into being to guarantee the processing of patents not only for the United States but even for the world. Next argument was, gentlemen, if you have not an economy, you will not have a government. If you do not have a government, you will not have a military. So it's the same type of arguments that I have been using in negotiating with many leaders throughout the world. The red zone signifies the development of the hydrogen to be able to utilize as a fuel source and render it safer than that of natural gas, and as a result use the water fuel cell technology as a retrofit energy system. It was paramount that in fact that this technology would have to be applied to existing energy consuming devices like that of your cars, your trucks. We do not have time nor the energy nor the monies to be able to convert the cars and the trucks over to new power systems. It has to be a way that we can use a fuel source that we can very readily get ourselves available to, and water seems to be the most abundant fuel source on the face of this earth if we can be able to release that energy from water economically. The first thing that was confronting was the fact is how in the world couldn't we be able to switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecule without consuming a tremendous amount of electrical power as opposed to the electrolysis process that we all know. What we addressed was, number one, slow down, okay. First thing that we were considering, he's right, it goes at 3:30, no. First thing we considered was how in the world can you naturally be able to switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecule without consuming a tremendous amount of electrical energy. So when we looked at the water molecule, we realized that when the hydrogen atoms unite with the oxygen atoms, under the law of physics, something's got to happen. And when the oxygen atom accepts the hydrogen electrons, then you develop an electrical imbalance by which you now have 8 protons as opposed to 10 electrons, so therefore the oxygen atom takes on a negative electrical charge. Since the hydrogen atom is now sharing its electron, and since its proton is positive electrically charged, then the hydrogen atoms will take on positive electrical charges. Therefore, the atoms of the water molecule is being held together by an electrical attraction force. It's quite obvious then that if you would now expose the water molecule to an external electrical voltage force, then you should and can actually separate the water molecule by a physical force through an electrical attraction, as Coulomb and Newland has stated clearly, as that you can use voltage in an electronic circuit to perform work. We also realize that as you will expose the water molecule to a high pulse voltage frequency, and as you raise the voltage amplitude, we now can take the water molecule into the liquid to gas ionization state. In the process, we restrict the amps and allow voltage to take over. At the same time that we are exposing the water molecule to an external electrical force of opposite polarity to perform the work of splitting the water molecule, since water is a dielectric liquid, okay. That's almost impossible. Natural water is a dielectric liquid, and as such, when you expose the water to a high pulse voltage frequency, the water will actually take on an electrical charge. So at the same time that we are splitting the water molecule by now allowing the water molecule to elongate and change the time share rate of its electron, as the water takes on the electrical charges, then the hydrogen electrical charge, positive electrical charges, will increase at the same time that the negative electrical charge of the oxygen atom will increase. And as a result, the negative charge electron, which is its covalent electron, is now being attracted to the positive charged hydrogen atom. And since the oxygen atom has a negative electrically charged, a repelling action occurs, and therefore we are now switching off the covalent bonding of the water molecule, and therefore satisfying the first major requirement of NASA, being able to release hydrogen gas from ordinary natural water and do it economically. This was one of the apparatuses which we had shown under 101 in the United States Patent Office and the World Patent Office that come in and show operability. If you show operability, you receive your patents. The water fuel cell technology is 180 degrees out of phase of the electrolysis process. We set up an environment.
Sorry. Can you please die Lichter etwas dunkler machen, bitte? Dann können wir die Dias besser sehen. Dankeschön.
We set up a non-chemical environment. The materials that we're using to set up the voltage field is ordinary stainless steel 304 material, which does not, it's chemically inert to liberated hydrogen and oxygen atoms liberated in water exposed to a high voltage field. You add no chemicals into the process. In order to do this, I now had to invent a new form of electronic circuit, which we call the voltage intensifier circuit. And since water is a dielectric liquid, and if you put it between two voltage plates, you now form a capacitor. And every electronic man knows that if you would put a coil in series to a capacitor, you now develop what's called a resonant charging choke. And so we're now putting two coils on opposite side of the capacitor, and we are now forming a pulse frequency circuit by which you will now, once hit the resonant frequency of water, of natural water, amp flow drops down to a minimum, allowing voltage to take off to infinity if the electronic components will allow that to take place. Basically, what we're doing in the pulsing circuit is that as the pulsing circuit enters into the resonant charging choke, it creates the electromagnetic field, which now restricts amp flow to allow voltage to perform its work. Now, in physics, we know, and have known for a long time, that voltage does, in fact, perform work. But heretofore, no one ever dreamed of using this technology in reference of using and liberating hydrogen and economically from water. So we're now restricting the amp flow and allow voltage to take over. We had found out that once you restrict the amps and allow voltage amplitude to be increased, hydrogen gas was being generated on an exponential function. Okay. Okay. Those who are electronic engineers, you know that there's two aspects to electrical power. There are amps and there are voltage. The only time you consume electrical power is you consume it in the form of amps. If you restrict the amp flow, you have voltage left over. Voltage is a form of potential energy. It is not consumed energy, and as a result, we're now using potential energy to perform work. Yeah. We had found out that the electrical polarization process occurs in all forms of natural water, even including the most purest form of distilled water. Once we realized the fundamental operational characteristics and parameters of the electrical polarization process, we now raise the voltage amplitude by which we now take the water into the liquid to gas ionization state. As we take it into the liquid to gas ionization state, the voltage potential is now ejecting or pulling away the electrons from the combustible gas atoms. We had found out that when you attenuate voltage amplitude in reference to pulse frequency, you will hit the phenomena of resonant action, by which you are producing a tremendous quantum leap in hydrogen generation over the prior arc. We also found out that once you hit resonance and subject it to the stimulation of the pulse voltage and then switch it off, then the hydrogen will continually be produced on the power output stage. Example being that once you hit a resonance, we could excite it for 5 seconds and you're producing gas for 94 seconds. You divide 5 into 94, we were producing gas, hydrogen gas, 19 times more on the power output stage than on the power input stage. We also realized that if you will leave the pulse voltage frequency continuously or constant and don't touch the apparatus, hydrogen gas is now being produced on a geometrical configuration and will continue to increase in production of a hydrogen gas until such extent that you would reach the maximum flow rate of water going into the resonant cavity. So we now have another form of control of regulating hydrogen gas production. These operational parameters now satisfy the second major requirement of NASA to use hydrogen as a fuel source, that we can control the hydrogen gas on demand. We are now starting to aid the electrical polarization process by injecting laser energy into the system. And by doing so, we're now causing even a faster and a greater rate of hydrogen production to occur, as you see right here. But we are also doing something else. We want to take the combustible gas atoms even to a higher energy state. This is an example of a laser injection resonant cavities. Those cavities themselves like to be extremely small since they're taking on a form of capacitor. We use solid state lasers in injection of photon energy into the process. Those in electronics, they are simple little LEDs, light emitting diodes, but they will produce a coherent light. We don't need a large light intensity to accomplish the task. We don't want to focus the energy down to a concentrated point. We want to allow the light or the photon energy to be absorbed by those liberated combustible gas atoms. There's an example of what happens when you subject water molecules to a high pulse voltage frequency and allowing the laser pulse frequency to be superimposed within the process. As we started to do our experimentation, we had realized that there were many phenomena that were occurring in order to bring about the results of using hydrogen as a fuel source, going from the random state to the alignment, to the polarization, to the molecular elongation, to the liquid to gas ionization state, but we are also going down to the atomic destabilization of the water molecule. This is an example now of a vertical array resonant cavity stacked together, and as the lower resonant cavity releases its electrically charged combustible gas atoms, it is now injected into the second cavity, which increases the process and eventually will now allow a tremendous amount of hydrogen gas to be produced at the top. Examples that you can subject it to 110 volt pulse frequency, and yet you are now compounding the increase of voltage equivalent to 1,000 volts in the upper resonant cavity. There's an example of a 3-tier resonant cavity configuration. Now, once we had found out that we can use hydrogen as a fuel source and release it and control its rate of production, hydrogen is extremely volatile, as we all know. If you ignite it with ambient air, it burns around 325 centimeters per second. The blue zone signifies the ability of rendering hydrogen safer than that of natural gas. This is the #1 area that gave us the ability to retrofit hydrogen to any existing energy-consuming device and do it economically, because if I can adjust the hydrogen burn rate to co-equal fossil fuels, then it is not needed for me, for an example, to change the design configuration of an internal combustion engine. But also had to comply with both the federal and state and local highway safety code regulations to render this type of fuel cell safer than water. We addressed the phenomena of natural water, that water is like a sponge. It will absorb ambient air. Those who have gone fishing knows that if you look at a gill of the gill of the fish simply agitates the water molecule to release the dissolved air. When you light a match, the question being is, why does not the air burn up? Because the bulk of ambient air is composed of non-combustible gases, or gases that do not support the burning process. Likewise, the fuel cell is a multi-gas generator. It is also releasing ambient air, which is absorbed by the water. As a result of this multi-gas being released, we automatically can adjust the burn rate of hydrogen gas from 325 centimeters a second down to around 47 centimeters a second, co-equaling that of natural gas.
Please, we can't follow. You are too quick.
Okay. I'm going to have to talk to my mother and say, hey, Mom,